this drug is dangerous. You cannot play with it. It's not funny. It's not something to laugh about. And trying to send that message with clarity that good people don't smoke marijuana.
Every day, every night, all the time. Every day I need an ounce and a half. SP, the only flow that you know, with a bounce and a half. Listen, kid, I need a mountain to cast so I can roll up, hop in the whip and like bounce to the ab. I get high cause I'm in the hood, the guns is around. To take a blunt just to ease the pain and humble me now.
Greetings. Did you know that cannabis is the most commonly utilized federally illegal drug? A recent study showed that over 50 million individuals admitted to having utilized cannabis once. And yet, it is a Schedule I drug on the Controlled Substance Act, deemed as having no medicinal use and a high potential for abuse. In this series of interviews, I speak with experts within the cannabis space. We discuss everything from the public health and the medical concerns to environmental challenges and calls for social justice. There's much to discuss, but even more to learn. Join me on this journey into the emerging cannabis industry. Greetings, I am Dr. Tyson Lloyd Gray, and we are back for another episode looking at this emerging cannabis industry and the various facets of it. I'm super excited today because I have with me the co-founder and CEO of Simply Pure. She is the first African-American female owner of a dispensary in the United States.
First African-American owner.
First African-American owner.
In the United States.
Right, female or male. So congrats to you for
Thank
that.
you.
It is
Thank
an honor
you.
to have you here.
Thank you.
And so today we're talking specifically about some of the social justice implications and looking at cannabis equity. And so I wanted you to just start off and tell us a little bit about Simply Pure, the industry, what do you do on the day-to-day, and what got you into being a dispensary owner?
Yeah. So, wow. So it's now been 13 years that we've been doing this.
Wow.
We were licensed in 2009, and we decided to get into this industry because I was on Barack Obama's National Finance Committee. I was also the campaign manager for Congressman Jared Polis, who is now Governor Jared Polis.
Yes.
And so what we knew was going to happen was the Ogden memo was going to come out from the federal government, allowing the states to decide how they wanted to work with cannabis or legalize cannabis. My husband and I decided that we were going to open up a dispensary because we wanted to be able to talk about the political aspects of what was happening in cannabis and mass incarceration and police brutality and the harms that were going on in the Black and brown community. What really brought us to that point was my younger brother, I had met later in life, but his very first words to me was, "Sis, I just got out of prison."
Wow.
And so when you hear those words, your heart sinks, because if someone just got out of prison, they've done something horrible, right? I mean, they're really bad, right? And he said that he had gotten arrested with 4 ounces of bad Texas street weed, about $160 worth of cannabis, and that cost him 10 years of his life. Wow. And 4 of those years he spent picking cotton in a maximum security prison.
Wow.
And he had to pick 100 pounds of cotton every day to purchase his freedom. So I grew up here in Colorado off and on, went to the University of Colorado, which is predominantly a white university. Colorado is predominantly a white state. And honestly, all the way through until the point I met my brother, I've never met anybody that was arrested for weed.
Oh, wow.
I've heard about people getting tickets, getting pulled over and the cops took their weed. I mean, I've heard all of that,
Right.
But and even as a college student on CU's campus, I mean, we'd be rolling weed on Friday afternoon. CUPD would come by and be like, put that away. I'd be like, all right. But so I knew that it was illegal, but I likened it more to a speeding ticket than I did to a prison sentence.
Right.
So hearing that somebody actually went to prison and had to pick cotton, I mean, it pissed me off, is really what it did. So as my relationship with my brother grew, we decided that we wanted to put a black face on legal cannabis. And because we had just gotten out of rooms with the current president, and both my husband and I are vets, we had been well vetted by the United States government. Yeah. We knew that these black faces, they were not going to make criminals out of. Yeah. So from the point that we received our license, we had been screaming from the rooftops about mass incarceration, America's slave labor class, and that's what has motivated us for the last 13 years to be a part of this industry.
Wow. Okay, so that's amazing entry into this work. And so I want to go back just a little bit, right? So obviously we both, are minorities in this country, and we're very aware of a lot of the systemic and systematic oppression, right? But for someone who hasn't, seen 13th, right, and they're not as familiar with the impact of the war on drugs, specifically on Black and brown communities, give us just a little bit of how prohibition of cannabis has impacted Black and brown communities. So you spoke a little bit about your brother, but just like on a larger scale.
Absolutely. So going back to the point that America has never been without a slave labor class. 1864, we ended slavery. The day after that, the 13th Amendment came into place, and the only place that slavery is allowed under the Constitution of the United States is for incarceration. The minute that happened, we started to incarcerate mostly Black men, but Black men, Latino men, Asian men, because America, once we gave up actual slavery, the slave labor class never went away. Right. And what people need to understand is that when you go to prison, and the reason we have mass incarceration is because so many of the Fortune 500 uses slave labor for what they do. For example, Whole Foods Market got called on the carpet, and I think by the New York Times, I'm not really sure when it came out, but they were teaching incarcerated people how to make artisanal cheese. And that was something that they were very proud of doing until people started calling them out for it and saying, yeah, but are you going to pay them a fair wage when they get out to make artisanal cheese?
Right.
And so they saw the error in their ways and they backed out of that. However, we see this every year during fire season in California. California is very proud of the fact that it uses inmates to fight fires, and it pays them $1 a day. That, my friends, is called slave labor. Yeah. In the case of my brother, I've often said that we should sue the cotton industry because we can actually deduce 4 years of labor from my brother, 100 pounds of cotton per day. What was the cost that they actually owe our family? Yeah. So these things are still going on today. There are numerous call centers and different things that are using prison labor for these very large corporations. So if you can imagine how much money I would make if I did not have to pay my employees. Right. It gives you an amazing, free labor, America's slave labor course, or slave labor class, which brings us back to mass incarceration. And what's upsetting most about cannabis, right, is that communities of color are targeted. They know that if we arrest a car full of Black young men or Latino young men, the chances are their families are not going to have the attorney that calls up the DA that says, don't you even think about it, release this kid right now. Those kids are going to get prosecuted and put into a prison system. And whether that prison system is for 1 month or for 10 years, they know that the minute they arrest them and put them into that system, they now have slave labor. And that is the reason why mass incarceration exists. And it's also the reason why it exists for cannabis, because quite frankly, they know that cannabis is not addictive, and they know that the minute I arrest you for a cannabis charge, we don't have to pay to put you through a rehab. We know that you are not going to have, I just forgot my words, when you're addicted to something, you don't have it.
A withdrawal?
Withdrawals. We know that you're not going to go through withdrawals. So the minute we arrest you and put you in that uniform, you're ready to work. Yeah. So that's the reason why our communities were targeted, because that was the best place to find slave labor.
Yeah. I think that's great. I think it's amazing that you're actually doing this work. You're extremely political, and I completely agree that that's necessary work. But I want to hear a little bit about you. So only about 2% of dispensary owners in the U.S. are African American, right? Out of the 30,000 that currently exist, you get your license. You're the first African American to get a license. Why not just run business and make money, right? What compelled you into this very political, working on campaigns and really like working to redress these issues beyond just, being a businesswoman and building, Simply Pure?
I don't know. I don't know why I just didn't go out there and make money. Yeah. I mean, there are nights when I lay in bed, go, why don't you just go make money, girl? What are you doing? Because, for me personally, and I have no judgments on everything else, and I hope to make a lot of money one day. We really do hope that this works out in that way. But honestly, from day one for me, it's been about saving puppies and saving the world and making a difference in life, right? Mm-hmm. And when I heard my brother's story, I got to tell you, honestly, it crushed my soul. Mm-hmm. It absolutely crushed my soul that they would take, you're an attorney, and the thing that kills me is the U.S. Constitution says very clearly that you cannot have cruel and unusual punishment.
Right.
You can have cruel punishment, and you can have unusual punishment, but you can't have cruel and unusual punishment. Making a black kid pick cotton, what does that do to a human being?
Yeah.
What does that say, and especially to a young black man, and a young black man from an inner city place? It's not like he hasn't grown up with enough issues in the first place, and then to pile on the inhumanity mm-hmm. from that and the absolute removal of all that you are. Mm-hmm. And it would have ensured, my brother is terrific now, and he came out with a good heart, and he's been working with us now for many years, so he's good. But if my brother didn't have someone that could bring him out of Texas and everything else, mm-hmm. what they would have created would have been an individual that would have probably spent the rest of his life being a slave, because he would have gotten out for this and he would have came back in again. And that would have been the course of what happens. So what I saw with that was the fact that America was targeting us to continue to make slaves out of us for the rest of our lives, mm-hmm. and that just was not okay with me.
Yeah. So now what do you say to people who, playing devil's advocate, who mm-hmm. say, cannabis is illegal, black people shouldn't smoke it, they're breaking the law, so if they get penalized, that's the law, right? What's your response to that type of thought process?
Wine was illegal, so was vodka, so was beer. Just because we've made something illegal doesn't necessarily mean that it's harmful. And let's be very clear about cannabis and what it does and how it reacts with the system. There is nothing wrong with this plant. There has never been anything wrong with this plant. It is not addictive. It does not, if anybody's ever seen Reefer Madness, which is, if you've got nothing to do on a Saturday night, watch Reefer Madness, get a joint, smoke a joint and watch Reefer Madness, because it's the craziest show you'll ever see, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But, it doesn't do all of those things that we have been marketed negatively about for the last 100 years, mm-hmm. right? So the idea that this plant has been under tremendous negative marketing, and our community has been under this, old folks, you need to stay away from that, that stuff will make you crazy, and it'll make you do this, and it'll make you do that. None of that is true, which we have proven over the last 13 years here in Colorado. What we have seen in Colorado is drunk driving is down because people are choosing cannabis. Teen use has not changed by any measurable effect whatsoever, because cannabis is now in a store behind a countertop that you have to show an ID to be able to get.
Right.
The use of opioids in Colorado has dropped. So we have seen all of these amazing things happen, and we discovered that cannabis oil can help with childhood epilepsy, mm-hmm. help women who are going through chemotherapy because of breast cancer and uterine cancer. So all of the things that we have been told about cancer, about cannabis, is a lie.
Right.
So, it should never have been illegal in the first place. It was made illegal too because of the whole Nixon administration, and we've heard the tapes in Nixon's words that if we arrest people for cannabis, we can get rid of his problems, which are hippies and black people.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's as plain as you can say it, right?
Yep.
So 13 years is a short time.
Yep.
That we've had any legalization, right, specifically within states. I know that you do a lot with cannabis reform, right? Yep. And so what type of policies, because when you say reform, right, you're thinking there are policies that are in place that are not working. So what type of reform for this fairly nascent industry do you think need to be implemented? What are some of the policies that you're seeing that you're like, this is problematic, right, and how do we catch this early?
So what's problematic, and you said it a few minutes ago, is less than 2% of dispensary owners across the nation happen to be Black. About the same probably for cultivation. The point is less than 4% of all of cannabis right now happens to be Black or brown, right? So the reason why that's happening is because the licensing structure set up in all of these states does not allow people of not great means to be a part of this industry. And also too, when you look at a state like Colorado, what Colorado did early on was if you had a felony conviction, you could not participate in the cannabis industry.
Wow.
So that would be like saying the same thing to Bill Gates and Steve Wozniak. You guys can't participate in computers because you were building them in your garage before we knew what they were. So we effectively locked up and gave felony convictions to all of the folks that had been doing this work for Ray Ray and everybody else that we know, right, for a very long time.
Right.
So in Colorado, 34% of the arrest or in Denver, 34% of the arrest for simple possession happened to be Black. And I have challenged anybody that's ever been to Denver, find me 34% of Black people anywhere for any form in Denver, Colorado.
Right.
I mean, we can't even get 34% of the people at Broncos Stadium to be Black. So, I mean, it's upsetting to me that we were able to find 34% of Black people to arrest for simple possession, but we can't find 34% of Black people to give business licenses to and be a part of this industry.
Right.
The other thing that keeps people out too now is the tremendous cost behind, opening up any type of cannabis facility, right? And back 13 years ago, it cost us about $200,000 to open up our first dispensary because there were no rules, no regulations, basically first month's, last month's rent, and however you want to decorate your dispensary, right?
Wow, okay.
So first mover advantage was taken away from Black and brown people. So now for us to participate, you need to come up $5 million or $148 million or whatever it is that you're trying to buy. So these are a lot of the issues right now that are preventing people from being a part of the business structure of cannabis.
That's interesting. I was actually going to ask you about that process of becoming the first. Was it complicated? I mean, so 200,000 is obviously a lot less than what we're looking at now, where it's 2, 3, 4 million easy. But 200,000 still is not.
No, it's not cheap.
That's still not cheap money, right?
It's not cheap.
And not accessible to many of the individuals who, as you said, are the ones who are incarcerated, who have felonies, right? And so, how was that process of getting the license here, specifically in Denver? And then what are you saying now in terms of individuals who are attempting to enter? Are there additional burdens? Is it much more complicated now?
So there's two sides of that. First side is 13 years ago it was fun. I mean, because you found you a space. Our very first dispensary was in a office complex. It had a urgent care on the bottom, and we were on the fourth floor in the back in suite 420.
Was it intentional?
Well, it was funny because the landlord came to us and he's like, I have a suite 420. Would you guys want to rent that? We're like, hell yeah, we want to rent suite 420.
This is perfect marketing.
This is perfect marketing, and we decorated this beautiful dispensary, and the way, and even opening up our first grow facility, we grew with mama plants, and you clone them, a whole other thing on cultivation we can talk about. But our garage is where our mama plants were when we cloned them off of, and then, and as time went on, we grew into larger and larger grow facilities. But folks that come, they'd come through the dispensary with, backpacks, and they'd pop it up here and be like, hey, I got 5 ounces of this. What do you think? I'd be like, I don't know. Let's try it, And if everybody liked it, we bought it and put it on the shelves. I mean, there was no testing for, pesticides, heavy metals, or anything like that. Edibles were the same way. People would show up with edibles they made at their house and be like, hey, taste this.
Oh, wow.
So it was an interesting time then, and it was a lot of fun from the industry standpoint. But what people don't understand, it wasn't about money then, right? Because there wasn't a lot of millions being had and being made. But you could go to jail. This was really about your freedom at that time. And as a matter of fact, we were raided. And if it wasn't for our political connections, we would have been arrested.
Oh, wow.
I mean, we had to call senators and Congressman Polis and lawyers and say, yo, we're sitting here on the I-70. Are we going to Jamaica, or are you guys going to handle this for us? You can't get your hair done in jail, so it's a problem. But we didn't go to jail, but a lot of people in Colorado were being arrested. The federal government came down on numerous people, and a lot of people lost their freedom over it.
Interesting. I don't know if I was aware of that. So, because Colorado was the first to legalize within the state, so the federal government was still basically coming down on drug possession at that time.
They were coming down on the people that they could come down on, and yeah, they were definitely arresting people.
Interesting. So now you mentioned earlier the Ogden memo. Where was that in the process, and give us a little bit about what that actually did for cannabis industry.
So right after President Obama was elected, his administration released what we call the Ogden Memo, which outlined the fact that they were going to allow the states to create laws to be able to regulate the sale of, at the time, medicinal cannabis. And Colorado, because of our leadership, and Colorado was a great state, quite frankly, to be the first, because it's medium-sized, 5 million people, so it wasn't so overwhelming, such as a California or a New York, where I've got to get 40 million people to line up. We only had to get 5 million people to to figure this thing out. And cannabis has always been a big part of Colorado. I mean, beer, weed, and skiing is what happens here, right? so it wasn't an odd thing to have happen, and a lot of people that folks didn't think smoked weed in Colorado smoke weed. Lawyers, doctors, business people.
Yeah.
It was very
Everywhere.
prevalent. It was very prevalent. So Colorado was a great state to do that, and there was a group of attorneys that came together that says, yeah, we're going to legalize here. And they put together Amendment 64. We put it on the ballot, and cannabis has never lost on the ballot in Colorado.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
It got more votes than Obama did. It got more votes than our governors have. And every time we want to do something with cannabis, it passes in Denver, Colorado all the time.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. And so, in terms of the policies here in Colorado, are you satisfied with the policies that are in place, or are there certain policies that you think are problematic? Given that you guys have been doing this the longest, right? So I guess I'm specifically wondering, do you think that Colorado has a model that can be replicated, or are there still things that you see as being challenges?
So when we legalized, Governor John Hickenlooper, who is now Senator Hickenlooper, was completely anti-cannabis, and the current mayor of Denver has been anti-cannabis, who happens to be black, but those two gentlemen made it impossible to see more black and brown people be a part of this industry, because they allowed those, like I said before, with felony convictions not to participate. Yeah. So what we ended up with was, with the exception of me and my husband, for the first 6 years in cannabis, we were the only black folks that were involved in this space. So fast forward now 13 years, we have a new governor, Governor Jared Polis, who is doing a great job, and he's always embraced the industry of cannabis and has embraced the ideas that cannabis is a part of Colorado. Yeah. And so he has allowed for better business practices and has tried to bring on a social equity program. The problem with social equity 13 years after the fact is there are no spaces for dispensaries any longer in Colorado. There is no room for more grow facilities in Colorado. I don't like using the word oversaturated, but we are a mature market. Yeah. Colorado is what cannabis will look like once legalization fully happens and fully embraced. Meaning that society here has no issues with it. The dispensaries fit in seamlessly with their surroundings. Yeah. Simply Pure is on a great corner, surrounded by Bar Taco across the street, Little Man Ice Cream over here, top 10 restaurants, in and around it. So it fits seamlessly within the communities. But the problem is there's no room now to bring on black and brown owners. Unless you're coming to town with $5 million or $148 million.
And they make space for you.
and then they'll find the space for you, yeah, of course.
So now, does any of your work, and I'm sure that it does, right? But does any of your work deal with consulting for other states who are in those beginning phases and saying, like, this is what you need on the ground from the beginning, right? So that you're making space for Black and brown people.
So we have had the great pleasure and the great disappointment of being involved in almost every state that has legalized.
Oh, wow, okay.
Years ago, we started working with Jamaica on their legalization prospects. We've worked with California, we've worked with Illinois. Currently, we are working with New York and the city of Rochester specifically, and a number of your assemblywomen in New York. We have worked with Massachusetts. We are currently working with New Jersey.
Oh, wow.
The issue has been, I think that there are some great things that we have in place here from a policy standpoint.
Okay.
And let's use Illinois, for example. We thought that Illinois wrote a great law and they were going to bring in Black and brown folks and this whole thing was going to work. And then somehow at the last minute, we ended up with this lotto system in Illinois, and I don't know how that happened or where that came from, but basically, you know, the big multi-state operators or lobbyists and different things found a way of ensuring that they were able to get a leg up. So there were Black entrepreneurs in Illinois who scored 100% on their application and did not get a license because of the lottery program.
Oh, wow.
So basically, you could have come in the very last piece that where you didn't score 100%, but if you had $2 million to buy a lottery ticket, now all of a sudden you're a player. So we are hopeful for New York. And we are hopeful for New Jersey right now.
Okay.
And because both of those states have such large populations of people of color, we're really hopeful that this goes the right way.
Okay, so now you're gonna jump ahead a little bit.
I'm sorry.
But since you brought it up, no, that's fine. Since you brought up New Jersey, so I'm sure you saw the article that recently came out that out of 56 dispensaries that have been given license, 0 African American. Any thoughts?
Yeah. So we put in an application in New Jersey in 2018, and it was a combination of ourselves and Viola. Viola is owned by Al Harrington and Dan Pettigrew. So these two Black powerhouses came together with a mostly Puerto Rican Latino team on the ground in New Jersey. And do you know that 4 of the, I don't know how many judges, gave us 0 points for diversity? So there was...
Wait. What was their definition of diversity?
Good question. And we laugh sometimes. I guess we didn't put enough white folks on the team. I don't know. You know, so what has happened, I think, with a lot of the medical marijuana, and this is where it gets kind of convoluted, right? Because medical marijuana dispensaries will always be first in line for recreational. The way that everything goes legal right now is states allow for medical marijuana sales, right? And then it's medical marijuana for a period of 2 to 5 years. And then everybody realizes that the sky is not going to fall and children aren't going to, become addicted and it's not going to be a bad thing. And then they vote on going recreational. When they go recreational, and in a lot of ways, business-wise, it makes sense. Those that have already been selling cannabis would be first in line to be able to sell recreational cannabis to give legislators in the states time to figure out all the rules and regulations, right? So when we opened up our medical marijuana dispensary, the very first day we had like 75 customers. Not a lot.
Yeah.
You know, when we opened up our recreational dispensary, I mean, it's a line, 3 or 4 times, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's why medical marijuana businesses get to be first in line, because they are the most prepared to be able to get ready for that onslaught. So what's happened in New Jersey and New York is those medical marijuana licensees will ultimately be the first in line to sell recreational, right? Okay. So New Jersey, unfortunately, has not, they have not licensed any recreational, anything yet, right? So they're just now getting there. So yeah, it's no African Americans are there right now. And if anybody out there is looking to be a cannabis entrepreneur, I really suggest you go to the one in medical marijuana states right now and buy a medical marijuana dispensary and hold tight.
Okay, interesting.
That's the best way to. That's probably the cheapest way and the best way to do it.
Okay, interesting. So I'm wondering. Go ahead.
So one of the things that I found really interesting about when you asked about the Colorado model, so we put in social equity, and because, as you know, Ward Connerly in 209 back in California 100 years ago prevented all of us from having race-based legislation, right?
Yeah.
So when you do the social equity piece, you can't just say, these licenses are for black and brown people who were harmed by the drug war.
Right.
You have to come up with, well, these licenses are for anybody that's lived in Harlem from 1971 to 1982, and so we have to come up with all of these hoops. So here in Colorado, our social equity, we thought we did a really good job of hitting the best ways of getting the most black and brown applicants. But what's happened here is the first social equity delivery license went to a white man. The first social equity dispensary went to a white woman. The first social equity hospitality license will go to a rich white man. So it's sad that they have found ways to carve these out because we can't say these licenses are for black and brown people, which is the intent of social equity.
Yeah, absolutely. Have they done away with the felony? You can't have them?
Yes.
So that's
Yeah,
done at
that's
least.
done.
Okay.
Yeah. We have moved past that part. Unfortunately, the old governor and the current mayor have seen the error of their ways. But I'm assuming they've only seen the error of their ways because since 2014, Colorado Cannabis has put $1 billion of tax revenue into the coffers of those elected officials.
That tends to change people's minds.
That tends to change people's minds.
So, as someone who has done this many times over, right, several iterations, and unfortunately we haven't gotten it right,
No.
right? What is in between what is currently being done and saying these are for black and brown people, right? Because it seems that, based on the history, based on, what we're seeing, regardless of the policies, there are these loopholes, there's these exceptions, right? And we have not found a way to ensure that black and brown individuals who have been impacted by the war on drugs, individuals from communities that have been impacted from the war on drugs are able to get access and entry into this billion-dollar industry, right?
Yeah.
2 or 3, if you're in charge, they give you the pen and paper and say, you get to write this, right? What are 2 or 3 things that we could look for, hope to see that would maybe change that outcome?
I can't say black and brown.
You can't say black and brown. Like, is there a way, right? Because this is the challenge that we face, right? Short of individuals having, as you said, $2-3 million to come to the table, which just is not, feasible or realistic for many of these individuals. What policies are lacking? Or is this a situation where there's nothing wrong with the policies, and now we need to look at the individuals who are implementing the policies, right? Do you think that there's something else going on where this isn't accidental, like the policies weren't thought through, but this is intentional, like this policy would work, but there are individuals in place that are intentionally subverting the intent of the policy? What are your thoughts?
Yes, and yes. So I'm reminded of Dr. Bill King, who was professor of African American Studies at the University of Colorado for 40 years, who terrorized us as students, but is now a dear friend. And he's listened to me rant and rave because I get my panties in a twist over all this stuff. So I was talking to him one day and I was like, the system is just broken. It's just broken. The whole system is just broken. And he's like, what did I teach you in school? He goes, clearly you weren't listening. And I was just like, oh Lord, now I'm in trouble. The system is never broken, right? The system is set up to serve the people that it is supposed to serve.
Sure.
So if we only have 4% of black and brown people involved as owners in cannabis right now, that's how the system was set up to be.
Yeah.
So the main issue is not being able to say that these licenses are for black and brown folks. If I could change anything, when we looked at social equity, we would hit each marker. So yes, we're going to carve out zip codes in areas where we've seen, the most arrest and the most harm done by the drug war. Then we're going to talk about people who are not we made a mistake in Colorado by saying if you were arrested for drug possession or for drugs, right, the word needed to be convicted, right? Because white folks get arrested just like all the rest of us. Just because you get arrested doesn't mean that you get convicted.
Interesting. Okay.
So you're an attorney, so it's a matter of playing with these words to be able to talk about, and now maybe we need to change it that you were convicted and had to pick cotton.
Yeah, let's be really specific.
Maybe we bring it down to those types of things to ensure that the people who are in line to be able to get these licenses are the folks that we are intending to be able to get these licenses for. Yeah. And then yes, the other part is sometimes the people who, the elected officials who are putting out the policies that are allowing for some of the other companies to be able to walk through loopholes, right? Mm-hmm. It really is difficult, without being able to say, this is for black and brown folks. Yet when we get arrested, they don't seem to have a problem saying, "Oh, we arrested this car full of black dudes."
Is there are there any policies that regulate or define the individuals who are perhaps on the panel making the decisions? Is that something that's been put in place in any of the states? So as opposed to simply saying that all of the applicants have to have a social equity percentage, right? And this is what qualifies as social equity. Is there a separate panel being put in place that is dispensing these licenses, and that panel therefore has to be diverse to ensure that you've got black and brown people on the panel at least?
Wow. I'm going to be careful, so I don't know this for exact sure. I do not believe that has ever happened, that we have said, here's the folks we want choosing. Okay. I will say that New York was very intentional about making sure that the people who were chosen to be on their, I don't know if it's called Cannabis Commission or Marijuana Commission, I know that they were looking for legislators and people who were actually working in policy in New York that happened to be black and brown. So I believe, and this is all new because we don't know how New York is going to turn out or how New Jersey is going to turn out. We're hopeful, like we have been for everything else, right?
Right.
Hopeful. So hopefully we're able to continue of making sure that we're putting those legislators of color on that selection committee and different things that are happening. But I don't believe that has ever been spelled out in policy. But I'm guessing, and I don't know this for sure, but you would run into the same issue, right? Can you say that we're going to have a blue ribbon panel of black and brown people?
Yeah, or at the very least a diverse panel, right? So if you have white people, but you also have black people, you have women, you have right, just kind of like making sure that individuals are represented, seated at the table.
And what does diverse mean? And that's what I'm saying. So you get to play in all these things. You know what I mean? Like, well, I'm Polish American, so so I get to be on the panel because we're not represented. Polish Americans weren't arrested for the drug war. It's really without being able to say black and brown. And that's what we need to go back to. And I think that if I ever ended my career on anything, I would like to upend what Ward Connerly did to America, 20, 25 years ago with, I think it was Prop 209 out of California that he took all the way across the United States, which effectively ended all race-based programs, including the challenges with affirmative action, right? Yeah. So, or even affirmative action to, I think the only one that stood was to college admissions. And right now they're tearing at that one as well too, right?
Absolutely.
So, America is not in a good place, and America, we need to be able to recognize race, and that's just something that we need to get comfortable with because, yes, we need to talk about it.
Yeah, well, good luck with that with states passing.
Good luck with that.
Banning critical race theory and, even the conversations around race, so.
Yeah.
So I want to transition a little bit. We're talking about states. Let's talk a little bit about the federal government. We know that it's illegal, Schedule 1, right? What is your stance on descheduling, downscheduling, legalizing? Obviously, each of those have different implications, and given where we currently are, it could, be positive or negative, right? Because if you legalize and you're taking the current landscape and making that federal law, then there are some challenges. Do you think we need to wait for legalization? What's your stance?
No, we don't need to wait for legalization. You know, for 13 years, every year I've been saying, we're going to legalize this year. We're legalizing, you know, because why wouldn't you legalize? So, and I get it. I have a lot of activist friends that feel like if we legalize, the big companies are only going to get bigger. Yeah, they are. Yeah. However, what I don't think that people understand, though, if you are currently in the cannabis industry, you are taxed under something called the 280E tax penalty. The 280E tax penalty is how they tax. It came out in the 1980s. It was set up for your big-time drug dealers. Yeah. So I am taxed and treated the exact same way that Pablo Escobar is, right? Yeah. So, and the way that that tax penalty works is it allows the United States government to basically go after you for tax evasion, no matter what you paid in taxes, right? So we at Simply Pure have no deductions. I can't write off my employees, my electricity. I get no deduction on the computers, the chairs, all of this stuff. Yeah. And on top of that, we lose, and depending on how talented your accountant is, you know, 40 to 60% of your income off the top. And all of that money goes directly to the federal government. The federal government is the biggest partner in cannabis to every single cannabis company out there in America right now. Yeah. And they are making a mint off of everything that we sell. And the way that that works in simpler terms is if I make $100 today, we bring in $100, we sell $100 worth of cannabis. If $50 of that went to my employees and $25 of that went to electricity, carpet, chairs, whatever else, that means that I kept, so $75 is gone. That means my company made $25 today. Right. If I was a regular company, the government would tax me on that $25 that I kept. Right. In cannabis, I'm taxed on the whole $100, even though I didn't keep it. Right. So there is no profit in cannabis right now, unless you can scale to a ridiculous size and have, you know, great accountants, and then they can kind of figure out how to increase your cost of goods sold, and you can kind of keep a little bit more. But no matter how they twist that, and even the companies that are making billions, it is still a ridiculous tax penalty to be able to exist under. Right. So with full-on legalization, that means that we would have access to banking, because right now we can't get a bank account at a major bank. We have a bank account. You have to be invited in Colorado to have a bank account. But it's not really a bank account, it's a depository, which allows me to write checks. Okay. So somebody comes every day, picks up our money, takes our money to a vault, sends a message to the bank that says, we deposited $20,000, so now I can write a $20,000 check, right? Okay. Because 10 years ago, on payday, all my employees would line up. I'd have $50,000 sitting here with one of those counting machines, and we would count out your cash for your paycheck. Not safe at all. Hey, you know, and if you wanted to feel like a drug dealer, that's when it was all going on, because, you know, you had like, literally, you had one of those, you're like, here you go, you know, and that's not good for you, because now you walk out with your, you know, $2,000 or whatever it is that you made, you know, that week in your pocket.
Anybody can stand outside. They know what's happening.
And they know that we also have, you know, that's what we're doing today. So at least the depositories have allowed us to not have cash on hand and be able to write checks. But we get no merchant services. We get no lines of credit. We get no overdraft protection. We get none of that, right? No credit cards, nothing. Wow. So legalization would fix all of that. Okay. It would also allow the SBA to act like the SBA, to put in training programs, to give small business loans, small low interest business loans. It would allow for banks to give lines of credit. Okay. Because, for instance, right now, if I want to increase my lights in my grow facility so that I can have better yield and grow a better product or better crop, let's say it's going to cost me $100,000 for those lights. My only choice right now to get that $100,000 is to go to some rich white guy and say, I need $100,000, and they're going to give it to me, but they're going to want 20% of my company in return. So at the end of the day, as small businesses continue to do that, what happens is the black and brown owners then end up owning 5% of their business. Wow. So legalization must happen, and yes, the big companies are going to get bigger. That's America. But it then at least allows a space for small business to exist. Okay. Because right now, a single dispensary cannabis owner will not survive. will not survive. And it breaks my heart for all of the people in New York and New Jersey and California. They're so excited to get a dispensary.
Yeah.
But if you have one dispensary license, unless you're Planet 13 in Las Vegas that sees, 14,000 people a day or whatever they see,
Yeah.
you will not be able to survive underneath the 280E tax penalty.
Wow. So a lot of the work now is really just laying the foundation and waiting for legalization so
Yep.
that you're already in line. You already
Yep.
have your system up and going.
Yep, 100%.
Wow.
100%.
That's really interesting.
100%.
So are you hopeful? I know there's a lot of bills right now that are in Congress. It seems like they get submitted every other month. There's the MORE Act, there's
SAFE Act.
the States Act, there's the Cannabis Administration Opportunity Act, Safe Banking Act. Are you hopeful about any of these? What are your thoughts about what's in them? Any particular one that you feel like kind of gets it right? What are your thoughts?
The only one that gets it right is full-on legalization, because every one of those acts that you just talked about, right, would be handled with legalization. Remove this off of the schedule.
Yeah.
So a Schedule 1 illegal drug means that the plant has no medicinal or societal value whatsoever. Well, if 3/4 of the country right now says it has medicinal value, if vets with PTSD have said that this helps them, concentrate and remove themselves from the effects of that PTSD, if women with, breast cancer and cervical cancer says after chemo, this plant has allowed them to not feel pain and still be a great mom to their kids, if people whose children have epilepsies have seen babies stop having grand mal seizures, then the federal government is lying to us because they are the biggest partner in cannabis right now and making more money than everybody else. And the fact that the Biden administration has not done this is the most ridiculous, stupid political move I have ever witnessed. At a time when they are losing votes, losing support, young people don't care anymore. You know what would make young people care? Legalize. This would be a very easy thing to have happen. And I talk to people that says, well, the intellectual class, well, we have to figure out how we're going to regulate and how we're going to roll this out to the states and what we're going to do. And I'm like, and excuse my language here, folks, but bullshit. Because we do it every day. It's called ATF, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. We do it.
Yeah.
We've been doing it. It's not rocket science. This is a piece of cake. Do it. So, yeah, it's time to legalize.
Okay.
It's beyond time to legalize.
And what do you think is the pushback, right? Because, you can easily say, oh, well, the Republicans are anti-legalization.
No.
We know there's a lot of that.
No.
But we have a control of the Congress. We have a Democratic president, and there's no legalization. Obama was there for 8 years. There was no legalization, right? So what do you think is the holdup for federal legalization? It's been sitting on that Controlled Substance Act for the last 40 years. Why hasn't it happened?
So 2 things. 70% of America right now wants full-on legalization. There is not another issue in America where 70% of Americans agree on anything. We can't agree on education. We can't agree on healthcare.
Right.
We can't agree on housing. We can't agree on anything except for the fact that legalization should happen. Obama didn't legalize because as a black man, he didn't want that to be his legacy. A legacy of not locking people up would be an awesome legacy. But, whatever. Why Biden hasn't done it? Quite frankly, Biden is of an age where he is just wrong. He's flat out wrong. Kamala Harris, Vice President Kamala Harris, is somebody that we supported. We had her at our house. We did a fundraiser for her. And she is ready to legalize, as is Cory Booker, as is Chuck Schumer, as is, everybody. We're ready to move on this. Sadly, we need to wait for certain people to be pushed out of office to be able to make this happen. And let's be clear as well, too, the Republicans have embraced legalization of cannabis. So this is going to be another thing that's going to get snatched away from the Democrats if they're not smart about what they're doing.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on some of the organizations that are kind of at the forefront? So I'm thinking about the Marijuana Policy Project. I'm thinking about Normal. What do you think about their work, their activism in this space right now?
So MPP just hired Senator Troy Hutchinson out of Illinois, who was the advisor to Governor Pritzker for cannabis. So she is the first black woman, and I believe the first woman to lead MPP.
Okay.
So I am very proud of what she is going to be able to bring to MPP. National Normal has done a great job for so many years in moving this policy forward since the 70s. However, there are so many organizations out there right now, led by mostly white men, that are all making money out of lobbying Congress. And they are lobbying Congress on keeping this illegal. They're the ones that are telling Congress, well, we just don't really know how to do this yet. We need to have all of these groups and committees and conversations and everything else. And no, we don't. And a lot of these organizations have just found ways for them to continue to line their pockets on cannabis remaining illegal. Yeah. So while some of them I think are doing the good work, if you ever run across an organization that is not saying it is time to legalize, period, then they are doing a huge disservice, and they are lining their pockets, and they are being completely disingenuous.
Okay. So since we're talking about other organizations, I definitely want to kind of figure out what is the interaction with other organizations, because we know this is a social justice issue, right? It's not just about, recreational use. It's really about, redressing, again, some of the disparities that have existed, and then also providing opportunities for jobs and for business ownership. What type of interaction are you getting from organizations like the NAACP or National Urban League, these organizations that are typically on the forefront, dare I say the Black church, right? Organizations that are typically on the forefront of social justice issues. Do they have any stake here? Do you find them leaning in, or are they silent?
Depends.
Okay.
Depends. So the NAACP here in Colorado was one of the big reasons why we were able to legalize, because the NAACP in Colorado was very clear of the fact that these arrests were happening and that they should not be happening. So they were big on that. The ACLU, along with the NAACP, put out a report, don't quote me, maybe 3-4 years ago, and it's called Marijuana in Black and White. And if you get a chance to pull that report, it's got phenomenal graphs and everything else, and they went state by state and of who's being arrested, what those arrests, looks like, how it carried out. An amazing report. So the NAACP in a lot of places, I think, has been definitely on the forefront of moving that. Okay. There have been some definitive activist churches and activist pastors and preachers that have said enough is enough. And Exodus 33 in the Bible, by the way, was Jesus' holy anointing oil that did have cannabis in it. So, so there's that for the religious folks out there. But so in some places we've seen it work, and in other places we've seen folks dig in, that are still believing the reefer madness, and they blame cannabis usage for people in our community not getting ahead. In the places where people in our community have not gotten ahead, it's because of cannabis laws, not because of the cannabis plant itself. Yeah. So it just depends. It just depends.
Yeah. I think that's a great distinction too, right? When you say cannabis has been so harmful to, African American communities. Well, is it cannabis that's been harmful, or is it the prohibition of cannabis and, these, mandatory minimum sentences that were part of the war on drugs?
Exactly.
And so really looking at the whole picture, I think is important.
100%.
Yeah. So now, one of the things I mentioned earlier that we have in common, we're both former military, Navy. And so,
never again volunteer yourself?
And so I'm super interested in hearing how you navigated that, because you talked about cannabis, in high school, and cannabis, in college. And so then you go into the military, which we know has zero drug use policy. Yep. You end up court-martialed and in jail. Yep. And so, two things. How did you navigate that time period while you were in the military, right, and an officer in the Navy? And then does any of your activism, try to change policies specifically as it pertains to the military as well around cannabis use?
So I smoked my first joint when I was 16 years old. I have preferred cannabis over alcohol, and I definitively prefer it now because 3 glasses of wine and my next 2 days are painful. It's just not worth it anymore.
Just 3 glasses?
Yeah, just it's so bad. It's like, oh my goodness, I just can't deal with today anymore. Sadly, and I'll stand by this, the 5 years that I was active duty military, I absolutely did not touch, come anywhere near, or deal with the plant. Because the punishment in the military, as you know, UCMJ doesn't play, right? There is no plea bargain, there are no deals being made.
That's not what you want.
No, there's none of that. And to throw away, you know, to come out with a dishonorable discharge and to throw away an entire life for a joint, I wasn't going to do that. Yeah. But the really sad thing that I do want to bring comparison to in the military, as you know, in the Officers Club, I can get top shelf alcohol for 75 cents. And the other thing that I didn't like about the military, when I look back on, especially as a young officer, if you could drink with the Marine Harrier pilots and, you know, stumble your way home and roll down the street, you know,
yeah.
you were a hero, you know what I mean? It's like, right on, you know?
Yeah.
And so the military, sadly, and today it's still the same way, has pushed alcohol on people, quite frankly, to the detriment of the military, and to the detriment sometimes of our readiness, and quite frankly, the detriment to a lot of young women in the military, and especially young women, or not especially, but women officers, women enlisted. We've seen rape happening in the military. It almost always involves situations involving alcohol. You know, it amazes me how we embrace alcohol as a society when so many ills are directly related to alcohol and alcohol use and addiction. We've seen a lot of people come out of the military, you know, with addiction issues, alcoholics and alcoholism. We would be a much better and ready force if we would allow people in the military to choose cannabis versus alcohol.
Yeah, I agree.
And I've worked with that quite a bit, and I bring it up in a lot of conversations because, you know, obviously we've seen issues at the Air Force Academy here in Colorado, and even on college campuses, quite frankly. You know, I remember as a young student, I believe that cannabis prevented a lot of bad things from happening because we'd be at a party and I'm high, my friends are drunk, and, you know, you see a bunch of guys over there looking at you all, you know, crazy and everything else, and, you know, I'm like, I'm out. I'm gonna go home, I'm gonna go get me a pizza, and I'm gonna go home and watch TV, right. And we're good to go. And unfortunately, a lot of my friends that were involved in, you know, excessive alcohol use found themselves in very negative situations.
Yeah. So, projections.
Yeah.
You have a long history in this industry, and so if anyone can kind of look back and ideally take that and project forward, it would be you. So, in spite of saying every year we're going to legalize it being wrong.
You're wrong. Okay, so I don't know that I'm the right person to ask for this because I don't know.
But after 13 years of being wrong, what's your projection now? Are you thinking it's going to happen during Biden's administration? Do you think that Biden doesn't have the mental, you know, fortitude or the will? Are you looking towards the next administration? What are your thoughts of the next 5 years of cannabis?
Yeah. I don't know. No. You know, putting on my political hat, outside of the money that the federal government makes on cannabis, it is befuddling to me why this administration hasn't fully embraced and moving legalization forward. It is honestly befuddling to me. I do not know Biden. I have met Vice President Kamala Harris. We've had a number of conversations about this. I know where she stands on wanting to move this forward. I know where Cory Booker stands on wanting to move this forward. But from the folks who do know Biden and the conversation I've had with them, they assure me that there is no way in hell that it's happening under his administration. Interesting. Now, sadly, I'm not sure that if something does not change, I don't know that Biden will get a second term unless there are some dramatic changes that happen in America.
Yeah.
I do believe that the next Republican administration will absolutely legalize.
Interesting.
Yeah, I absolutely believe that they will grasp this issue and call it their own. I 100% believe it. And to be honest with you, it's a smart move. It's a very smart move. It will energize a whole new generation of young voters who think that the Republicans are, I'm showing my bias here to your class. I'm sorry. I am a Democrat. But it will energize a whole generation of young people for whichever party is smart enough to do this first.
Yeah. Okay. But
let me just say this though. Do I believe it's going to happen? Yeah, I believe that we are a minimum of 3 to 5 years out for legalization to happen. I'm hoping 3 and less. But yeah, it has to happen, right? There are too many billions of dollars being sold in cannabis right now for this not to have happened.
Yeah, we have everybody joining us here.
Yeah, going over there.
Okay, and so as we close out, this has been extremely informative, so thank you very much.
No, this is, I love this stuff,
I mean, obviously you're steeped in it, so this is, it's nothing that you're not, immersed in and you're not familiar with. So I'm wondering for individuals, let's just say theoretically students who are undergrads, who are taking a class in cannabis, who are interested in the industry, what would you recommend, suggest that they do to just help move the needle forward, to help participate in the industry, if they just want to be a part? What would be any suggestions that you would give them in terms of helping to bring more equity and more awareness to this industry?
So I think that there's, a number of things that can happen here. And the simplest thing that we can all do, which nobody thinks about, is call your elected officials. Be open about this. Talk about this. Let folks know that, Mr. City Councilman, you know what? I enjoy cannabis as a young college grad or as an undergraduate or as a graduate student or as a law student. This is of interest to me. I find that it's easier to study at night after I have, a couple of puffs or whatever it may be. If you're a young mom, if you're a mom, if you're a dad, if these things are helping you be better at your parenting and being more focused and there with your children, talk about this. Let's remove this cloud of which 70% of America wants to have happen. And when I talk to politicians, and it's always true, right? The vocal folks are usually always the minority and the anti-folks, right? Those are the people that they hear from, they don't hear from people that are like, yes, I love this stuff, you know what I mean? Or this is something that I, integrate in my life on a daily basis, or that I'd rather go home with my husband on a Friday night and smoke a joint and have a good conversation instead of have a martini together. Right. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with a martini, don't get me wrong, but I'm just saying it's time that we remove this veil. And the only way that we do that is if we normalize it, if people like me and you are talking about it, right. And for me, I want to give people permission to be able to do this. I want young women to see me and say, yeah, this is a very feminine, fantastic thing to do if this is what, you are interested in being. But we have to remove the veil of negativity around it. And I think that most young people under the age of 30, 40 years old are doing that. Right. The folks that are in the way are, older and haven't really understood the whole, they're still believing the reefer madness and the negative marketing. Yeah. But call your elected officials, have these conversations, make this normal.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. The marketing was strong and it was pervasive and it was for an extended amount of time, right? Yep. So we're really just getting this, this response that's kind of elucidating the industry for what it really is.
100%.
And I think you're right. Negative publicity always is going to be, negative press is always going to travel faster. And you always get bad reviews before you get good reviews, right? 100%. And I think we're all guilty. You have a bad experience, you're like, give it the manager,
tell
right?
The world,
you have an amazing experience, you're like, that was great, but you don't
tell anybody.
You don't tell anyone. So I think, just being vocal, articulating that, and to that point, I think it's great that you're not just, an owner, but you're also active in the political aspect
Yep.
and running for office. Tell us a little bit about that, if you would. I also ran for office in New York for city council.
All right.
So yeah, we have a couple
All
things
right.
that
All
overlap.
right.
But
All
let's just
right.
see a little bit about your candidacy for office before
Yeah.
we close.
So I have been a campaign manager. I have been in communications. I've worked on loads of different campaigns. I wasn't expecting to be on this side of campaigning. But when I had the chance to be the University of Colorado system is 4 campuses. So it's CU Boulder, CU Denver, University of Colorado in Colorado Springs, and the Anschutz Medical Center. It's a $5.3 billion budget. The budget for the entire city of Denver is $1.9 billion.
Wow.
So we dwarf the city of Denver.
Wow.
We're the 3rd largest employer in Colorado. And we are the flagship system public school here in the state of Colorado. We have not had Democratic control of the Board of Regents for 42 years. President Carter was in office the last time the Democrats have had control of this amazing system.
Wow.
And so to be a regent at the University of Colorado, my alma mater, the school that I graduated from, where I was commissioned at, is one of the biggest honors of my life. And I am thrilled running for office. It's, having your hair on fire, right? It's, you're going through this process, you're raising money, you're talking about why it matters. Mm-hmm. And then most people look at me and go, what's a regent?
Right.
Why do I care about a regent? But for me personally, it's like everything I do. You know what I mean? It's like, why am I involved in cannabis? Because it's meaningful to me.
Yeah.
Why would I run for this office? Because it's meaningful to me. And when something is meaningful, you give it your all, right?
Right.
It becomes a part of, who you are and what you talk about, right? And I mean, I matriculated to the University of Colorado now almost 40 years ago. And so when I think about being the first in my family to go to school and, not having the $100 matriculation fee, having to borrow it from somebody so that I could, me and my little Pell Grant be like, please, and now to actually be somebody that sits on the Board of Regents that controls who we hire as the president, what this school looks like, how we bring on diversity, affordability, and the ability to make things a little bit different on an all-white campus. I am so excited to be able to be that regent. So let's keep our fingers crossed and make it happen.
Well, good luck. It is great to have you running and great to have you in this space and all the work that you do. So thank you. I appreciate it if no one else says that. And thank you for taking time to speak with the students. And I'm sure they have learned a lot. I have. So.
Well, and I'm thrilled. And if for students, if anybody wants to follow us, we are on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. I'm WL James on all of those things. Okay. The dispensary is Simply Pure or Simply Pure MJ. Okay. They can find us and they can kind of see all the amazing things that we do and the amazing products that we have. And then, of course, if you want to follow the campaign, it's Wanda4cu.com. Okay. So there's all of that out there. But one of the things I do want to say is we have marketed ourselves as America's most political dispensary. I like to think of ourselves in the same vein that Ben & Jerry's thinks of themselves as, right? Okay. So yes, we upset a whole lot of people, and I'm sure that some people don't want to come to our dispensary because of our activism. Yeah. But you know what? We stand behind it, and we are so proud of what we do. And I've often said, the level of success for us is determined not by who stands with us, but who stands against us. So I am thrilled to have the enemies we have, and we're going to keep moving this thing.
Well, hopefully more future dispensary owners follow this model and don't just make money, but actually attempt to create change in this industry.
And make money too. I do want people to make money. That's important. But if money is the only reason you do something and that's your only motivator, you'll find yourself not living a fulfilling life or a life that matters. So.
Well, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you for coming out.
Have a good day.